Okay, hello everyone, and welcome to a new episode of the Jeff Nippard podcast. In this episode, I'm speaking with Dr. Pak. Dr. Pak is one of the world's leading experts in the area of minimalistic training. He did his PhD on the minimum effective dose needed to increase strength in powerlifters, and has since become one of the science-based fitness community's leading voices in the area of minimalistic training for both strength and hypertrophy. As I explained in a recent YouTube video, the majority of bodybuilding and fitness content seems to be focused more on maximalist or more is better training, and the idea of minimum effective dose training does get relatively less attention. But the reality is that most people find the idea of getting in an effective workout in a much shorter time frame very appealing. People are busy, and most people don't have the time to dedicate 1 to 2 hours to the gym every day. And so the question of what's the least amount of time we can spend in the gym and still make measurable progress is an important one. So in this podcast, Dr. Pak and I discuss just how effective minimalistic training can be, and we try to pin down just how low you can go with training volume and still make gains. Now, this conversation can be essentially broken up into 2 parts. For the first part, we talk mostly about strength, and then for the second part, we talk mostly about hypertrophy. I thought this was a really good discussion, and it covers a lot of new ground that you may not have heard much about before. And so, without further ado, I give you my discussion about minimalistic training with Dr. Pak. So, I guess for anyone listening who isn't aware, I recently uploaded a video about training minimalism, which basically is just like how to structure your training so that you're, I guess, prioritizing time efficiency more than optimalism, if you will, right? So that's kind of the way I think about it. Like, what's the least amount of work we can do and still make progress? And within that time-limited framework, how can we maximize things as much as possible? So in that video, I laid out like a variety of different strategies to do that and kind of briefly touched on the research on minimum effective dose training. So you told me over text that you saw that video. Did you like it? What do you think?
It would be funny if I said no, I didn't like it. I came here for just smoke. No, I liked it a lot, and I liked the fact that finally a more mainstream voice such as yourself and somebody coming from I guess optimization background, because you're a bodybuilder and you're somebody who is after getting jacked and and very strong. And it was very nice and refreshing to see somebody put out the concept of minimum dose training. Not necessarily, I don't have a bias for minimum dose training, even though I've done a lot of research in it. But I think it's a concept that a lot of people will benefit from, can benefit from. And I think a lot of people out there do much more than they really need for the result that they're after, if that makes sense, right? Obviously, excluding maybe some top level competitors, people that just want to get big and strong. You can get pretty big and pretty strong without doing as much as people think.
Yeah, I was really curious about this because the internet sometimes tends to distort things. And so like the people who are more likely to say comment on content are those who feel like really passionately about it. And so I think over the years, I've kind of gotten this impression that like, oh, my audience is actually like a bunch of like really hardcore guys. Because for example, I'll upload a video where I'll recommend, say 10 to 20 sets per muscle per week. That's like the standard like evidence-based recommendation. And I'll still get tons of people who are like, wait, per week? That sounds so insanely low. Like, how can you possibly expect to make progress like that, right? And sometimes I wonder, like, what do these workouts actually look like for people who think that that is a low volume of training? Like, are they including warm-up sets in that? Like, are those sets actually high effort sets, and so on and so forth? But anyway, I think like some of that commentary online has led me to believe that far more of my audience is interested in optimizing everything and just, doing whatever it takes essentially to get, results, even if they are severely diminishing. However, after uploading that video, I've realized that I think it's actually the opposite. I think far more people want to make progress, but have it, fit within their lifestyle and not have it basically be like, the most important thing to them or the most important part of their day. It's just like a part of their day, right? So it seems like there is like a big market, if you will, for training minimalism. And the idea seems to be really appealing to a lot of people. And actually, I posted on my Instagram story before I uploaded that video a poll. And it's just like a thought experiment. I don't think it actually breaks down this way. But I asked people if you could train for 2 hours a day and get 100% of the results, or you could train for 1 hour a day and get 98% of the results, what one would you choose? And I think something like 65, 70% of people picked 1 hour for 98% of the results, which makes sense, right? Like 2% extra results, you're not really gonna notice it. But I think that goes to show that like a lot of people in, say, like the mainstream fitness community are less interested, I think, in optimizing everything and just want to have a program that's going to give them results that fits into their lifestyle, which is where training minimalism comes in. And I think that it's a area of fitness that's been underserved, like both in the literature and in online content. Most of the stuff is focused on how do we get peak results rather than how do we get measurable results that's actually sustainable or fits into someone's schedule and so on and so forth.
Exactly.
So yeah, so you've pretty much become the I think minimum effective dose guy in the science-based scene, right? Like I feel like you're putting out most of the research in this area. I've heard your name come up a lot as I was, researching for the video. Is that kind of how you see yourself?
I mean, when I started my PhD, because the PhD started sort of from like the idea was much more generic. It was like, let's look at, powerlifting and strength sports and maybe what can predict powerlifting performance. And then as I got into it, I was, as a result of a pilot study we did, which is out there, and that was on powerlifters. The idea of, okay, let's see, like, what's the least one can do and still get stronger? That idea came up, and I was like, surely there's plenty of stuff around that, right? And as I looked behind the curtain, or the literature curtain, if you may, I saw that, wow, not only is there not that much out there, obviously there was literature on single sets and single versus multiple sets, but there was nothing on strength sports and more advanced lifters. But yeah, I've become sort of the minimum dose guy because that was what my PhD was on. But then I found the area of research very, very interesting, because although personally I enjoy being in the gym for long periods of time, depending on what else is going on, and I love, training and doing set after set after set, but the idea of achieving meaningful increases in strength or muscle size by doing much less is a very appealing idea to me, and I think it has a lot of takeaways for people that are practitioners, because I'm a practitioner as well. I'm a coach, so it interested me from a lifter and a practitioner perspective. And what you mentioned before was interesting about viewing your audience differently as the years pass and you got to engage with them more, because I think a lot of people mistake maximum adaptations with meaningful adaptations. And like an okay analogy, I guess, would be something like income. You could be putting in 70 hours per week and earning, mid six figures, or putting like half of that work and still earning six figures. And for most people, they'd be like, bro, I don't care about the extra, 100K. I'd much rather have much more free time. And I think the same goes with gains up to a certain extent. I tried to do a Mike Israetel analogy sort of thing there. I'm not sure how it worked, but
That was good.
yeah.
No, that makes perfect sense, and I agree. I think what happens, and perhaps part of the reason why it's the present state, I would say, of like fitness content and research is centered around like maximalism or optimalism, whatever you want to call it, is that most of the communicators in the space are people like me, and so the questions we're interested in is how do we get maximum results, but people who just have fitness be part of their lives as like a hobby or something they do for their health or what have you, generally don't care about it enough, say, to like get into research or want to become like a fitness YouTuber or podcaster or something. So I feel like they just don't get served as much by people because we don't relate to it quite the same. But it's nonetheless like really important, and I obviously really appreciate the work that you've done, because I think it's helped elucidate that we can in fact get away with doing substantially less work and still make progress, which is really good news. Because like one thing I said in the video was, you hear this recommendation of like, okay, 10 to 20 sets per body part per week, right? And I think it can sometimes give the impression to the listener that this is like a threshold. Like if you don't hit a 10 set minimum, then you get nothing. Once you've crossed 10 sets, now you're making gains. But that's not what the research shows really at all. It's almost like that is the optimum level, if you will, even though it's very individual, and advancement status can come into play, but that approximates what would be like maximum gains, I think. And as you approach that, or if you go less than that, you still will make substantial progress, and more than I think a lot of people would realize. So maybe we can get into some of the details there, with like as far as strength and hypertrophy goes. So we can maybe
For sure.
split up the discussion into two parts, if you will.
Yeah, for sure.
So let's start with strength. What would you say? And I think we should quantify this in terms of like volume, right? Because I think that's sort of like the bottleneck. We can talk about rest periods too, because rest periods I think actually do chew up more of the like time in the gym, but I think it's the length of your workout will ultimately be dictated by like the number of sets you do per workout and per week, right? So let's start with that. What would you say is like a minimum number of sets per week or per session that someone would need to do for strength? And when I talk about strength, I'm talking about like increasing the amount of weight you can lift on a squat, bench press, or deadlift. That's usually what people want.
For sure. Yeah. So I'll break it down into two subcategories, just sort of general resistance trained individuals or recreationally active individuals, and then powerlifters. But obviously, recreationally active individuals can draw from the powerlifting literature as well. So we did a systematic review and meta-analysis in 2019 looking at exactly that. What's the least one needs to do to get stronger in squat, bench, or deadlift? The idea was to look at powerlifting research, but there was none. So we ended up looking at recreationally active individuals, essentially trained individuals, people that had a minimum of 1 year of resistance training experience. And what we found was that 1 to 3 sets performed per exercise, per power lift per week for somewhere between 6 to 12 repetitions and around 70 to 85% 1RM, close or at momentary failure. So at the point where one is unable to perform another concentric repetition, that was enough to yield suboptimal but significant, statistically significant increases in one repetition maximum strength. We had data only on men and no data on the deadlift, but there's no good reason to believe that women would have different adaptations than men. But then we followed up with a bunch of studies on powerlifters, and the least. So, how detailed do you want me to be?
I mean, I'm curious. I mean, I think I'd want you to be detailed in terms of like the volumes, like the weekly volumes or the per session volumes. But yeah, go ahead. Yeah, you've got.
The reason I asked is the way we did our data analysis for some of the training studies is instead of using inferential statistics, essentially looking at statistical significance, what we did was we spoke to powerlifting coaches and athletes and asked, hey, what do you think is a meaningful strength increase over 6 weeks? Because 6 weeks was the length of our interventions. And just to mention for the systematic review before, a few sets per week would be sufficient for around 6 to 12 weeks. So that was for the systematic review. Then we did a few training interventions. So we took powerlifters and put them through actual training programs for 6 weeks and asked powerlifting coaches and athletes, hey, what do you think is a meaningful increase? We also triangulated that with data from openpowerlifting.org. So we looked at what is required for somebody to move up one ranking in terms of powerlifting competition results to see if what the coaches and athletes regarded as meaningful actually made sense, right? Because it could have been that we just spoke to 150 random coaches and athletes. And long story short, we had one group which was doing one set of 1 rep at RP 9 to 9.5, so a near max rep. And they were doing that twice per week for the squat. So 2 reps per week, 2 reps per week for the squat, 3 reps per week for the bench. So 3 sets of 1 per week for the bench and 1 set per week for the deadlift. And they had, just to give you the percentages in terms of the probability of them achieving meaningful increases, I'll give you the mean sort of strength change as well. But they had around a 6% chance to experience gains greater than what the coaches and athletes regarded as meaningful, and around a 13% chance to be within what's meaningful. But keep in mind, we had another group that did the exact same, but then followed the single with 2 sets of 3 at 80% of whatever they hit for the single. Make sense?
Yep. Yep.
And they had a 99% chance of having gains superior than what the coaches and athletes regarded as meaningful. So over 6 weeks, they gained around 33 kilos on their total, terms and conditions apply, and about a 1% chance to overlap with what the coaches and athletes regard as meaningful. And to further triangulate that data, we also interviewed very experienced powerlifting coaches and athletes. And I'm talking about multiple IPF world champions, all-time world record holders that are still standing. I can't reveal their names, unfortunately, but we're talking like top 5 rated all time, and coaches that had worked with multiple world champions and all-time world record holders. And what came out of those interviews supported what the intervention studies found. So they said that a few heavy sets per week at 1 to 5 repetitions, anywhere between 2 to 4 sets, may be enough to attenuate significant strength increases. And yeah, sorry, go on.
So you just said to attenuate significant. Did you mean to stimulate or significant strength increases? Like it was enough?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Sorry, attenuate was the wrong word. I was trying to be too fancy there. I should have said to get stronger.
Yeah. Okay. No, that's actually really interesting. I'm familiar with this research because I went through it in prepping for the video. So it makes sense to me. But I'll just like quickly recap this. So for the intervention study, it was a 6-week study. This was competitive powerlifters, did you say? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so
I could give you their pre-totals if that makes sense.
No, that's okay. I mean, people will have some idea that it's like if you're competing in powerlifting, you're a pretty good lifter, right? Mm-hmm. You're probably better than average, if you will.
Yeah, for sure.
And then you did the squat twice a week, just one heavy single repetition. And that was a high effort set on both days. So you're looking at something like upwards of like 90% of your max. So like, let's say I could squat 500 pounds on that single for my squat. I might be doing something like, 455 up to something close to 500 pounds on that squat day. And I do that twice a week. And that was it.
That was it. That was the super low volume group.
And then that group, you said saw. So explain to me what that group saw in terms of strength increases, because I think you said like something like 6% or to 13% of what they would consider to be, progress or whatever. But like, did they make any strength progress? Did they just maintain their progress? Did they add actually like kilos to their total? What exactly happened with that group?
Yeah, so this is where the statistical approach that my mentor James Steele chose, which is amazing and really cool, confuses people, because if I had just told you a mean increase, that would have been that, right?
Yeah.
So they gained about 5 kilos on their squat over 6 weeks, and by what I mean with the probability of achieving strength increases greater than what the coaches and athletes expressed is, we wanted to see whether that 5 kilo increase is actually meaningful. But for the squat specifically, because I was referring to total strength before the change in squat, bench, and deadlift strength, they had a 15% chance of exceeding what the coaches regarded as meaningful, and around a 20% chance to be within what they regard as meaningful, with that average 5 kilo increase in 6 weeks. Make sense?
Yeah, it makes sense, but I'm just curious, like, why did you put, let's say, like the coach's opinion on the pedestal? Like, why did that become the standard? Because like, to me, a 5 kilo increase, so that's about what, like 12 pounds, something like that. Is that just on one lift, or was that a total mean increase?
That was just on the squat.
Just on the squat. So like, I mean, if I put 10, 12 pounds on my squat, I'm a competitive power lifter, or an ex-competitive power lifter, in 6 weeks, like I would be very happy with that, quite frankly. You go. Like that sounds like very good gains, right? So it's like, to me, it almost sounds like you're underselling the results when you say a 6 to 13% probability of reaching what the coach would consider to be, substantial progress, because that depends on how high the coach's standards would be, right? I mean, it almost sounds like you're making it more arbitrary to me. Like, to me, a 10-pound or 5 kilo increase on a squat in 6 weeks in advanced lifters off of doing 2 reps.
Yeah, that's cool, right?
Is impressive. It's incredible,
yeah, it was.
Right?
But That was the whole point. Your reaction was spot on, because if we had used inferential statistics, it could have been one, the samples were very low. So we're talking about 16 people in total. And it could have been there was no statistically significant difference. And that would have been that. People would not look past that. So,
Right.
and that's why we asked the coaches and athletes to see what an expert opinion, what an expert in the field, or what a practical difference is, what a practical change is. And that's why we then compare that data to openpowerlifting.org data to see, hey, do their opinions match what one would need to climb up one spot in the rankings per year? Does that make sense?
It does, but it sounds to me like it's a very high standard. Like it almost sounds like even if you had a quote unquote optimized routine, the probabilities of reaching that threshold would still actually sound underwhelming, because it's a hard thing to achieve regardless.
For sure.
So I mean, you guys are the experts. It's just from a communication standpoint, it almost sounds like, okay, maybe one set, like one maybe this like one set, one heavy single per week, or 1 to 2 heavy singles a week is maybe not the best thing to do. But to me, it sounds like, even on a high level, that's a very viable strategy.
I agree.
And I should say, I mean, like, it's not really new. Like, I think for a while there's been a camp of powerlifters who do the heavy single every day style of training, like a Bulgarian style approach, if you will, right? And so I think it has, like, let's say, real world viability as well. Like, people have had success with this approach. I think the issue that comes up from the other side, like, say, like the volume side, if you will, maybe along the lines of, well, is this really sustainable? You know what I mean? Like, would you be able to do heavy singles twice a week for longer than 6 weeks? Like, this almost might be like an approach to, like, specialize, if you will, or like it almost even sounds like a bit of a peaking approach. So even though it's a bit too low volume for what I would use for that, right? But nonetheless, I think one could argue that, okay, perhaps it's not surprising that you'd see pretty impressive gains in a 6-week time frame, but then how would that play out over the long term?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
And just one thing I wanted to add, although the one group that was doing just the singles, their probabilities of achieving, important changes were quite low. The group just that did the singles and then added 2 backup sets of 3, which is not that much extra work, they had a 99% chance of achieving superior gains than what the coaches and athletes regarded as meaningful. So that was the shocking part.
That is shocking, actually, and it almost it almost makes the opposite argument. It almost says that, well, just add in a couple back offsets and you'll almost guarantee that you're going to get really, really, really close to optimal gains.
Yes.
Right? So it's like, if you're trying to design a minimalistic routine, I think what we could say for strength is just doing 1 or 2 heavy singles close to your max once or twice a week is going to get you some results. But then after that, if you add a couple lighter sets, what some might call like technique work or volume work or hypertrophy work or whatever, speed work, still in the, let's say, 1 to 5 rep range, but substantially lighter. So something around like 80% of your max. Do that for a set or 2. Now you're like there, that's about, you're going to get good gains as far as strength is concerned with this approach. Okay.
The way we expressed it was powerlifting athletes looking to train with a minimum effective dose approach can do so by performing 3 to 6 working sets of 1 to 5 repetitions each week, with these sets spread across 1 to 3 sessions per week per powerlift, using loads above 80% 1RM at an RPE of 7.5 to 9.5 for 6 to 12 weeks, and expect to gain strength. Athletes who wish to further minimize their time spent training can perform auto-regulated single repetition sets at an RPE of 9 to 9.5, though they should expect that strength gains will be less likely to be as meaningful.
Okay. None of this is like super surprising because I think we know that to get better at lifting heavy stuff, you have to just lift heavy stuff. Like, so that we say, like, strength is more specific than hypertrophy. That is to say, like, you can't get stronger by lifting light weights. Like, you have to lift heavy. And then, so we'll move on to hypertrophy shortly, but I'm just curious, like, how you view the role of volume as far as strength is concerned, because you do see coaches, and I've been one of them, who will recommend this, like, these phases of high volume training, these like GPP phases where you're doing like sets of 8, sets of 10. You'll see coaches do 6 sets of 8 for squats, right? And it for power lifters who are really primarily concerned with strength. And it's like grueling training. But the idea is that, this will help promote hypertrophy, increase work capacity, this sort of thing. So then when you later do the lower rep, heavier stuff, it'll be able to like transmute, if you will, into maximum strength gains, and you'll get better results that way than if you just say had a heavier, lower volume approach year round.
Mm-hmm.
What do you as a minimum effective dose guy think of that? Like, are you just wasting time and energy doing the 6 sets of 8 as a power lifter, and would you be better off just doing heavy singles year round with a couple back off sets? Or is there really something to having these like volume accumulation phases and then these low volume, high intensity transmutation phases?
Yeah, I think there's definitely something to having higher volume phases. And having worked with hundreds of people and a lot of competitive athletes, there's many ways to go about getting one repetition maximum strength increases. Obviously, more specific work will tend to be better. But as you mentioned, as a power lifter, you do care about hypertrophy to a certain extent. And there are certain people, although this is more anecdotal, that will respond differently to different rep ranges. And we must also consider the individual and the psychological aspect of training with very heavy singles. We did another intervention study where we had one group do singles and backoffs, and then the other group did an AMRAP at 70% of their pre-test 1RM. So they did like sets of 10 and 15, and they saw greater strength increases than the group that did just the singles without the backoff sets. Does that make sense? I threw a lot at you there.
I want to get that right. So you had one group that did AMRAP, so as many reps as possible, with 70% of their max. So this is something, this would be around like a 12 rep set, maybe a 15 rep set for some
maybe
people.
Maybe 15, yeah.
And then you had another group that did heavy singles plus a couple back off sets.
Yeah, they did better than the AMRAP group, but the AMRAP group did better than the group from the previous study that did just the singles.
Oh, wow. Okay. So what does that tell you then? Like, I find that surprising because I wouldn't expect people to see, outstanding strength gains with, sets of 70% of their 1 rep max if they never handle a, anything that approaches, say, like a 1 rep max load. Like, why do you think that is?
It was a very small sample because our data collection got cut because of the pandemic, so we ended up having only 9 people, 4 and 5 per group. So it may be just out of just random chance,
I could see it happening more likely maybe with less experienced lifters, because you could say like, if you're only doing 1 rep a week or 2 reps a week, you're not getting a lot of opportunity to really fine tune your technique. Whereas if you're doing 12 reps per set, like those reps can really help you like grease the groove, as powerlifting coaches call it. It's really hard to get in a groove if you're only doing 1 set per week. So I think if the lifters were a little bit less experienced, I don't find it particularly surprising that they would see better results with a AMRAP approach. You could also say, well, maybe they just saw like such better hypertrophy that led to more strength gains too, because you probably wouldn't see much hypertrophy with a single rep approach, right?
Yeah, you'd probably maintain at best.
And then there could be something also to the fact that like as many reps as possible is obviously a 2 failure approach, whereas the single group may have had a rep or 2 in the tank. Although I don't think that would probably make a difference as far as strength is concerned.
Yeah, it may be that there was a novelty aspect to it, and it may be that, hey, just because the one group was doing so little training volume, but like 1 rep per week for the deadlift is like, it's not even low volume. It's, hey, bro, I came to the gym, something came up, I gotta leave, I'm at 1 rep. So the fact that they were taking these AMRAPs close to 9 to 9.5 RPE, and it may be that, hey, this is something they hadn't done before. It was just for 6 weeks, so I don't think, and they were still squatting, deadlifting, benching, so they still got some specific practice as far as the lift goes, maybe not as specific as doing heavy singles, but it may have been the novelty effect of that. The reason I mentioned it was that because you asked me about volume and its importance, I think that there are times, and after speaking to all these coaches and hearing their experiences, they've had lifters at a very high level that responded differently to different stimuli. But yeah, this like heavy singles and very heavy work, I don't think is a year-round approach. You could include heavy singles in your program and have that there, but you could still also turn the minimum dose sort of I don't know what it is like. You could go on the minimum dose side of not singles but sets of 5 to 8 reps. That's and you could do a couple of sets of that per week, close to failure, because that's what the systematic review found, that was enough to increase 1 RM strength in trained individuals. Were they power lifters? No, but if hypertrophy is also important, and you're tired of just doing heavy singles, and psychologically you're like, man, I'm Jeff who squats 500. I really don't want to go and load 440 on the bar again. My joints feel, I don't want to. I'd rather take a couple of sets close to failure and do 8 reps. So that's a way that you can go about it. But I think that higher volume at least, not high volume, but higher volume periods are definitely beneficial for people that want to maximize strength and hypertrophy. But sorry, high doesn't, because I think people have sort of lost the definition of high and low, and they hear a lot of educators, especially evidence-based educators, talk about higher volumes, and they assume that, wow, we have these tons of studies on people like themselves, and like if you do less than 10 sets per week, bro, you ain't making no gains. But in reality, it's not like that, as you mentioned as well.
Right. And there's obviously a huge individual aspect to this too. I think if anything has come out of the volume literature over the last maybe 4 or 5 years, it's that there's huge inter-individual variability in terms of what people will respond to. And so when speaking with averages, it's almost kind of really hard to do when it comes to volume, because we might say, okay, 10 sets per week is optimal, right? However, for some people, like literally 4 or 5 sets per week might be optimal, and 10 sets way too much. And for other people, 15 might be optimal, and 10 is not enough. So there's such a big range with that, and especially when it comes to hypertrophy. Before we get to the hypertrophy stuff, so I've always kind of seen myself as like a power builder, and I think most people who are like serious about this side of fitness kind of are like, or see themselves that way. Like they don't want to just have this, like, I'm going to say a bad word, but like non-functional muscle. You know what I mean? Like they don't just want to look like a big bodybuilder. Like they want to be able to put that muscle to use and be strong, right?
The F word.
Not non-functional was the bad word there, by the way.
Yeah, the F word.
Yeah. So for me, I tend to chunk up my training in terms of like priorities, right? So like sometimes in my training, I'll be prioritizing strength a little bit more, and I'll put, hypertrophy at like maintenance, if you will, even though I'm at like sort of a forced maintenance at this point in my training career anyway, when it comes to muscle. But that's the way I think about it. And then at other times I'll, dedicate more to hypertrophy and be like, okay, let's try to eke out this like extra last little bit of natty gains, if you will. And then I'll put my strength work to maintenance, right? That's more of an advanced strategy, but I think it can still apply to people who are in like the intermediate stage as well. And so what I'm doing at the moment is focus more on hypertrophy. So I'm doing like a push-pull leg split, and I have a lot of exercise variation. I'm training with high volumes. And what I do for strength is I'll just do one heavy set of, usually I'm like 1 to 4 reps on the squat on one of my leg days. And I'll do one heavy set of 1 to 4 reps on the deadlift on my other leg day. And then on one of the push days, I'll do a heavy bench set for 1 to 4 reps. And then on all of those days, I'll do about 2 back off sets that are maybe around 4 to 6 reps. I feel like that's a really good way to set up a strength maintenance. In fact, I'm actually still making strength gains a bit on that, honestly. And it doesn't chew up much time. I'm only hitting each lift once a week. And the argument that you hear from the bodybuilders is, oh, well, if you try to combine strength work with bodybuilding work, it's going to kill your central nervous system and your recovery capacity and all this stuff. And it's like, bro, it literally takes me like 15 minutes, to per lift to get this done at
Yeah.
the beginning of my workout. And then I just do all the volume for my bodybuilding stuff after, and I get strength gains. So it's like
Yeah.
best of both worlds, right?
Yeah. I think the word the words actually, central nervous system should have some sort of ban for certain people. And there's a bit of a nocebo in the powerlifting community. And don't get me wrong, I grew up I grew up around strong powerlifters on PEDs that were full on, one heavy set with reps, super fatiguing. If you squat more than once a week, you're gonna be in a wheelchair, and so on and so forth. So I think there's a heavy nocebo attached to lifting heavy. But now we've seen the tide turn slowly with people doing heavy singles year round. And your approach is exactly what I'm doing. I like deadlifts. I mean, I have two deadlift bars behind me, and I train for hypertrophy mainly, and I don't do much squatting at the moment, but I want my deadlift to still progress. So what I do is I do a few heavy singles or doubles or triples, literally a few, meaning 1 to 4 sets per week, and the rest is hypertrophy work. And I've done that with many clients who wanted a sort of hybrid approach, who were like, hey, I want to get bigger, but at the same time I want to at least make some 1RM specific strength gains. So the concept of the minimum dose does not need to be viewed as either you're doing 2 sets per week or you're doing 20 sets per week. You could mix and match depending on the adaptations that you're after, and you could do what you're doing and still do 10 plus sets for hypertrophy, or you could mix and match based on muscle groups. I don't care about my legs getting bigger, for example. I'll do a few sets per week, take them close to failure. Even though I used to love squatting multiple times per week, I don't now. But the rest for my arms, for example, that were lacking, I'll do much more volume because I want to, I enjoy it, and I want to eke out even that extra 2% that most people won't really care about.
Yeah. No, that makes perfect sense. Okay, let's move on to hypertrophy. First, I want to get your thoughts on this idea of a dose response relationship between volume and gains, right? Because that's something that's become kind of like a meme in the science-based fitness world, right? It's like
for sure.
More volume equals more gains, right? I mean, more is more is better, whatever. And I think that, like, I'll just share my 2 cents really quickly. Like, I think that when it comes to hypertrophy, that's been pretty well fleshed out, that like on average, more volume tends to lead to more gains up to a point. Past that point, it doesn't do anything. And then at a certain point, it is probably counterproductive in terms of like slowing down the rate of gains. That's hypertrophy. When it comes to strength, the relationship seems to be much less clear because, as we said initially, the main factor I would say for strength is exposure to heavy loads. And then obviously there's like a technique neural aspect, but past a certain level of advancement, it is just, mainly exposure to heavy loads, right? So what would you say is the role or the relationship between strength gains and training volume?
Yeah, it's quite complicated, as you said as well. And you presented the Ralston meta-analysis on your video, where if you look at the forest plot, where Ralston compared moderate weekly sets, which was defined as, I think, below 5. Okay, I was just buying myself time to see the number. It was defined as 5 to 9 sets per week. And low weekly sets were less than 5 sets, and then high weekly sets were over 10 sets. And both forest plots, so they had the 2 forest plots where it was high versus low and moderate versus low, and the dot was just on one side, slightly favoring the higher volumes. I think that there comes a point, which we saw from our intervention as well, where too low is indeed too low for like really meaningful strength changes. So the group's doing just the singles, but you need just a bit more volume to start seeing more gains. Obviously, strength is a bit of an umbrella term, and we must understand that, and we're still trying to understand the relationship between hypertrophy and strength, especially in the context of strength sports. But I don't think strength and volume have the same relationship as strength as volume and hypertrophy, where we've clearly-ish seen in the literature that, hey, if you go from 3 sets, so if you go from 3 sets per week to 6 sets, maybe that won't differ much. But then if you go from 6 sets to 10 sets or 12 sets or whatever, that will differ by quite a bit. But yeah, for strength, I think a bit more may be better, but I wouldn't be confident in saying, hey, you doing 5 extra sets versus 2 extra sets is going to get you double the amount of gains. But sorry, little terms and conditions. This is viewing training in a sort of short-term period. If we're going to zoom out and look at your training overall throughout the year, and if we assume that hypertrophy is important for strength gains long term, and again, a lot of your viewers are not, freaks that are like, yeah, I don't care, I just want to squat, bench, deadlift a lot, and if I look the same, it doesn't matter. So if hypertrophy is also important, then the story changes a bit. And if you're a powerlifter who's trying to be at the top of your game, the story changes a bit.
Yep. Okay, that's perfect. So let's talk about hypertrophy now in terms of a minimum effective dose. So like, yeah, what would you say is the least amount of work you can do, the least amount you can train and still make measurable progress? Not optimal
Yeah,
progress, but no measurable progress.
for sure. So I'll just give the TLDR first, and then we can dive into the literature if you want. So as you said, more sets seem to be better for hypertrophy. So over 9 sets per muscle per group seem to be the sweet spot-ish, range for people that really care about maximizing hypertrophy adaptations. But terms and conditions apply, and I'll get to that in a second. But 4 to 6 sets per week per muscle group seem to be enough for meaningful, for like solid gains in terms of hypertrophy. And the reason I said terms and conditions apply is because there are papers out there that have challenged the idea whether more is indeed more. So there's a paper called "Effect of Resistance Training Set Volume on Upper Body Muscle Hypertrophy. Are more sets really better than less?" And they looked at less than 3 sets versus over 3 sets, and they found that at least for the upper body, high set volumes were not significantly better. Keep in mind, I'm not saying you don't need to do more than 3 sets, but there's even studies out there that have challenged what we regard as common knowledge in our field. But again, I would recommend 4 to 6 sets per week is more than enough for you to get good gains if you're about that optimization life and you want to you're making a bet essentially. That's what people don't understand. Like, yes, we don't know for sure that you're definitely going to get more gains by doing more, but it's like, hey, if you were going to bet your gains, where would you place that bet, on 9+ sets or 4 to 9 sets, right? The
Okay,
caffeine kicked in.
so what do you so you say 4 to 6 sets per muscle per week as a minimum effective dose. So like, just so people understand, that would be like, for your chest, you would do 4 sets of flat dumbbell press. That's it. You're done for the week, right? Let's say your back, you're talking 4 sets of 4 to 6 sets. So let's say for a back, we'll go 6 sets. So we're talking 3 sets on a T-bar row, 3 sets on a lat pull down. You're done. Does that sound correct? Like, you think that the majority, let's just say this, you think that the majority of lifters, assuming those sets are executed to a high level of effort, would be able to make measurable muscular hypertrophy on that volume?
Yeah, so that's a really good point that you made. Intensity of effort, so proximity to failure, to momentary failure, is important. Those sets need to be near or to momentary failure. And I think that exercise selection also matters. So doing tricep kickbacks with a dumbbell versus doing a tricep push down on cables and an overhead tricep extension on cables. If let's say you took those 6 sets and you did just tricep kickbacks with a dumbbell, I would bet that the person that selected better exercises, that bias long muscle lengths, etc., because they're doing so little volume and it's more likely that they can miss out on stuff, would make better gains. Sorry, last thing. And I would also say you might want to break, like you talked about back and said T-bar row and lat pull downs. Maybe some people will be like, hey, I'd like to include 4 sets for my traps specifically because it's a weak point. Maybe that's something worth considering.
Yeah, fair enough. I do tend to treat the upper traps kind of distinctly from like the upper traps and neck. I kind of treat those distinctly anyway, from like the lats and mid back, if you will, even though I know there's some overlap, but it's similar to how I treat the biceps differently. Like, I don't know if I would count a T-bar row as a bicep exercise. Like, I think at best it's half a bicep exercise. So
you're dropping some truth bombs here. You're telling me rows and chin-ups are not the only things you need for your biceps?
I don't think so, but you as the minimum effective dose guy have
No,
to.
no,
You
no,
have
no,
to. You're committed to that. No.
no.
Okay. All right. So 4 to 6 sets per week. All right. I think that sounds pretty reasonable. I think some people would say like at a certain point though, like is Jeff Nippard gonna make progress on 4 sets of back per week? Like I don't think so. What about like someone who's in their third year of training? Like, well, okay, maybe like that would be an intermediate lifter. Someone in their first year, yeah, I think for sure. So like who are we talking about when we say 4 to 6 sets per muscle per week? Is that anybody, or is that someone in the intermediate stage, in the beginner stage?
So okay, and this is turning into we have data obviously on resistance trained individuals, but the data is lacking. I'm currently working on a systematic review on minimum dose for hypertrophy, just specifically that. And there's just a few, like a handful studies on trained individuals, with such low training volumes. But as a coach, I've worked with people that are well in the advanced range at the higher sort of side in terms of age, or in their 35 plus to 35 to 50 range, super busy, super stressful lifestyles, and they have been able to make meaningful hypertrophy increases with those numbers of sets. I have one person in mind, but which I used in a recent presentation, but we're talking about people that have been lifting for 15 plus years. Keep in mind, those sets were hard sets. They also supported those sets with, the appropriate amount of calories, so they gained weight over time, and all those things are important, because when we look at the literature, those things we tend to kind of forget that, hey, if you're trying to get bigger, even if you're an advanced trainee, you'll have to gain some body weight, and you'll have to, make sure that training is hard. Do I think that you can make gains with 6 sets per muscle group per week as an advanced lifter? Yeah. Will that be forever and for everyone? Maybe not.
No, I actually completely agree. For the record, I was playing devil's advocate when I said that, because I do think that you can. It may not be at the optimal rate, but that rate becomes diminishing as you get more advanced anyway, right?
Mm-hmm.
So like, I think over enough time, it probably tends to even out regardless. That may not be completely true. You might be able to actually increase your ceiling with certain advanced strategies, including like high volume specialization phases and things like that. But broadly speaking, I would actually agree. And I think that the big caveat there is this low volume approach clearly can work. Like if you look at people, successful bodybuilders, like we have tons of examples of people who have used this approach and it's worked. You have Dorian Yates. I use the example of Jeff Alberts in my video as a natural guy, but there are other guys, who I'm going to say drug tested guys rather than natural guys, who who have had a lot of success with a low volume approach, like Skip LaCour, Jeff Willett. They championed this approach called max OT training, maximum overload training, back in the, like, I want to say early 2000s, and it was super low, like 2 sets of leg curls per week to failure, like Dorian Yates failure. Even bad technique is okay failure. Like I'm
Oh,
talking
wow.
like as hard as humanly possible, right? And you're resting like 5 minutes between sets to get hyped, and you're like meditating on how hard you're going to push each set, and this sort of thing, right? But I do think that is a like important stipulation, is if you're going to do the low volume thing, you have to execute those sets as perfectly as possible. And that there's 2 prongs to that. One is you have, or maybe 3 prongs. One is you have to get close to failure, like if not all the way to failure. And the lower you
True
go, I
failure.
think the closer to actual true failure you have to be. Um, the other prong is you want to have really, I think, good technique. Actually, I think that you because you need to activate the actual target muscle. If I'm doing only 6 sets for my back per week, and I'm swinging with my hips on 3 of them, now even less tension is getting on my back, right? So the technique does have to be good, and you have to maintain that good technique, reasonably good technique, when getting to failure. I think a little
Mm-hmm.
bit of momentum is okay because it actually helps you get the muscle closer to exhaustion. But you want to minimize it, and you want to keep the tension on the muscle you're trying to work. And then the third thing, as you alluded to, would be to pick exercises that actually are, let's say, more effective for that muscle. So like pick an exercise that would provide tension in a lengthened position, for example, which in your example, I think your example was perfect. With a tricep kickback, a dumbbell tricep kickback, you have virtually no tension on the tricep when the muscle is stretched, and you have peak tension when it's in the contracted position. And it's like you get less and less tension as you go through the eccentric. Not ideal. No doubt would still work, but not as good as, for example, like a cable overhead tricep extension. And so when doing a minimalistic routine, I think choosing exercises that, let's say, recruit the target muscle in the most effective way is really important as well.
Yep. And
Yeah.
from like an observational standpoint, we see more and more bodybuilders train with lower volumes. So okay, again, keep in mind nobody's saying, hey, this is better than that, but we're saying this is quite good because in the past few years it's been, at least the way I've perceived it, either high volumes or whatever, you're not making gains, right?
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
we've seen more and more sort of trained by JP sort of fanboy or followers or whatever athletes of the guy, and people I know personally that compete at the natural pro level. Shout out Panayotis Lanis. They do 4 working sets per muscle group per week, and we're talking about people that win like big natty shows.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think anecdotally we're getting somewhat of a, I don't want to call it something confirming our bias because there's no bias, but it's confirming some of the observations that we've seen in the literature, although limited.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I completely agree. And then just another point to drive home here is there is this individual variability, right? So just because we have that validation in the real world that it is a viable approach doesn't necessarily mean it would be, as you said, the best approach for you.
Yep.
But it might be. It might be, you know.
Exactly.
And I think regardless of that individual variability, it is a viable approach for everyone. So if you have a period of time where, you know, you're busier or you just don't have the motivation or what have you to dedicate, you know, hours to the gym per day, you can continue to make progress doing something like this. And it's actually quite an enjoyable way to train, because you get to give it your all and be like, on every set, I'm going to execute it as well as I can. I'm going to put my all into these couple sets that I have, and then that's it. You know, there's something about that mindset that I think is more appealing to a lot of people than saying, okay, I'm going to do like 20,
4 to 6
you know,
working sets.
It's so many working sets for an exercise. It just gets so boring. And it's like, you got to leave a couple of reps in the tank. You never really get to challenge yourself in quite the same way. Now, there's nothing wrong with that approach either, but I think, you know, this is a way of training that would, I think, be appealing to more people than I think the science-based community tends to lead on.
Yeah, exactly. And it's a concept, not a method. Like, it's something that people should take, experiment with. Maybe you need 6 sets per week. Maybe you need 7. Maybe you need 3. Maybe you need 4. But yeah, that's why it was so refreshing to see your video, because we even have data for recreationally active individuals. So to slightly zoom out, where we had access to data for 15,000 participants over 7 years, and they were doing 1 set at 4 to 6 reps per week to failure. From a gym chain, that is in the Netherlands. That's their whole business model, and they made strength gains, 50% above baseline for the first 1 to 2 years, and then they sort of plateaued and increased by another 10% over 5 years. But you know, that's not for your viewers, but more like for my mother or for somebody who just wants to get some of the benefits of strength training. 20 minutes per week. That's all they did.
That's
and
crazy.
We're talking years and thousands of individuals. Yeah. So it was really great to see your video, because both trained and recreational individuals can take a lot from this, I think.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, before we wrap it up, I want to get your take on even lower. So like you said, 4 to 6 sets per muscle per week. What do you think of just doing 1 to 4 sets per muscle per week? Like, you know, I don't see this very much, but let's just say we had someone who was super time limited. They could only go to the gym 1 day a week, or they only wanted to go to the gym 1 day a week, and they do a full body workout where they do flat dumbbell press, 1 set to failure for 8 to 10 reps. Then they do Pendlay row or what. I actually don't like free weights quite so much when people are really time limited, because it takes a lot of time to like load the plates and do warm-ups and stuff. So let's just say T-bar row, one set all out 8 to 10 reps, leg press, one set all out 8 to 10 reps, seated leg curl, one set 8 to 10 reps, ab crunch, one set 8 to 10 reps. What am I missing? Arms, maybe. Okay, bicep curl, one set 8 to 10 reps. Overhead tricep extension, one set, 8 to 10 reps. That's it. That's your workout. Now you can get that workout done in 45 minutes once a week.
Less, yeah.
Right, or less. Okay, a half hour once a week. Like I think most people would actually make muscular progress on that routine.
I think if they watch your video and they go in with a placebo that, yeah, man, this is enough, new research is out, Jeff told me, I think there's a high chance that, especially if they're not, your natty pro bodybuilder who watches you, yeah, I think they can make meaningful gains over the course of a year if they're also eating and recovering. But if you're limited in terms of time and recovery resources anyways, might as well place that bet. What's your alternative? Not go to the gym? That's not an alternative, guys. But go do the 1 to 3 sets per muscle group per week. Take those sets to like true failure, make them count, and worst case scenario, you might slightly improve.
Yes, exactly. No, I think that's perfect. And then very quickly, one other thing that I touched on in the video that I do think is important is like from a time efficiency standpoint, there are a number of strategies we can use to make workouts even faster. So we've obviously focused on volume because I think that's how you mainly design a program. However, if you were to track it out like I did for a workout, you would find that the majority of your time spent in the gym is actually resting in between sets. And that's okay. I don't say that as a bad thing. It should be that way if your goal is strength and hypertrophy. But an obvious way to cut down on your total training time, would be to just rest less time in between sets, especially if you're doing more of like a moderate volume approach. However, the issue with that is if you rest too short in between sets, it might limit the total amount of volume that you can do. But even that is, again, we're kind of like creeping back into like optimization territory here, right?
Yep.
Because we don't honestly believe that if you rest, let's say 30 seconds to a minute in between sets, if we're taking those sets to muscular failure, how much of a difference are we actually talking there, right? Again, we're talking about diminishing returns on this point, right? So if it is more important for you to be more time efficient, it might simply just be worth it for you to rest less in between sets. Or, as I said in the video, you can almost like progressively overload your rest period by kind of gradually reducing it. And so in that sense, like your cardiovascular endurance will improve as you gain size. And so the rest period won't actually like impair your ability to perform on subsequent sets in the same way. So basically, like in your first week, you could rest 3 minutes in between sets, then rest 2.5 minutes the next week, rest 2 minutes the next week, rest 1 minute and 30 seconds the next week, and just gradually like knock that down to save on time, rather than if you start at, let's say, 1 minute rest in between sets or 30 seconds rest in between sets, that might actually, your cardiovascular system might fatigue before your muscles do, or it might impair your muscles' ability to actually get close to failure. So that's the rest periods thing. I also like strategies like drop sets because they allow you to get a little more volume in a shorter period of time. So I think of a drop set almost like you almost get like 2 sets for 1 set in a way. Like you get a lot more effective reps in when you do a drop set or when you do myo reps. Like by effective reps, I just mean they're high tension reps because the muscle is already close to failure. So it's like if you can slam the muscle with a few more of those effective reps without killing a time by resting in between sets and doing those early lower tension reps, you're cutting down on time while still getting in effective volume. Is there anything else that comes to mind from a like time efficiency standpoint?
So you hit the nail on the head with the exercise selection point. So avoiding exercises that take a ton of time, but that can also help you avoid extensive warm-ups. So you doing a bench press might require you to warm up for much longer versus you sitting down on a plate, not even a plate loaded, the stack chest press machine where you can go, you do a few reps, okay, you're good to go, working set. So avoiding extensive warm-ups, skipping stretching. But I think you touched on most, if not all, the other techniques.
Yeah. And then simply just like not overdoing it with volume is probably one of the best things you can do. Because if you're only doing 1 or 2 sets per exercise, your workout's going to be pretty short anyway, no matter what you do. Yeah. All right. I'm just curious, like, before we wrap it up here, what kind of questions are you interested in answering now? Like, what is some future research you're looking into? What are you most curious about?
So we just published a preprint of the first study on deloads for strength and physique sports. It was an interview study. There's a survey part of that coming out as well. We spoke with a bunch of very high level bodybuilding and powerlifting coaches and athletes like IFBB, like IPF, world champions, etc. There is a training intervention study on deloads happening as well, and I'm not gonna reveal much because I'm not leading the project, but it's led by the student of a big name in terms of hypertrophy research. I'm pretty sure you know who I mean, but I would love to look. I'm doing the meta-analysis now on minimum dose for hypertrophy just to have that paper out there. I think the literature will benefit from having everything in one paper. So what's the least one needs to do to get bigger? Because now we looked at different meta-analysis and papers and kind of triangulated the data. But there is my good friend and PhD student here not my PhD student, but PhD student here in Southampton, Milo Wolf. He's looking at range of motion and muscle growth. He's currently doing a training intervention study. He published his preprint of his systematic review and meta-analysis a few weeks ago. So where he actually found that training at long muscle lengths was slightly better than full ROM, interestingly, but he's doing a training intervention study at the moment. He's knee deep in the data collection. I hope I'll be probably helping him on that too. And because I do research for the love of it, there's always going to be some form of strength and physique sport project that will come to life. We have a few things in the works, but I don't want to just bombard you now with titles and names.
No, for sure. But I'm just curious, like, I know you in the minimum effective dose context, but you obviously have like other interests in like strength and hypertrophy areas. So like, what is there anything else? You mentioned range of motion, like that's something that I feel like is sexy at the moment. Like, is full range of motion actually better, or is it actually just the part of the range of motion that matters more? I'm really interested in that too. And if I had to write a hypothesis, I would say it's actually probably high tension at a long muscle length that matters more than just full range of motion, right? But,
I'll send you Milo's systematic review because Milo is the ROM guy, as he calls or himself or people call him, and it was really cool to see like this systematic review was slightly different than other ones out there because it looked at both upper and lower body musculature, whereas other like a previous systematic review hadn't done that, and the sub analyses that were a collaboration of Milo and Dr. James Steele. I'm not sure if you know James. James is deep in his stats, and the sub analyses were really interesting, and they didn't just look at hypertrophy; they looked also at strength. But yeah, I love lifting in general. I'm not a power lifter. I'm just somebody who enjoys research. I don't make a living out of it, maybe not directly at least, but I want to look at anything that has to do with maximizing, or not necessarily maximizing, but muscle growth in trained populations and strength in trained populations. So deloads is one project that we're very interested in, and a bunch of other stuff coming out. There's a paper on powerlifting strength over time. That is also coming out as a preprint soon. We preprint everything. I'm not sure if you're a fan, but yeah, before anything goes to peer review, it gets preprinted so we can share it. But yeah, there's a lot of stuff coming out to give you a very confusing answer there.
No. I love that. I think that's really cool. One thing that I would like to see is more. Because I feel like maybe 5 or 6 years ago, I would have been like, okay, what kind of research do you want to see come out of the field? And I probably would have said like failure stuff, because I feel like that was a really important question that we didn't have a satisfying answer to. Like, we didn't know what the impact of failure was on the fatigue and recovery side, or how much of a positive adaptation it actually gave, and like how close to failure should we be training. But I feel like we've gotten a lot of research on that over the last like 4 or 5 years. One thing that I feel like is lacking now is exercise selection research, because the best thing we can turn to for exercise selection is EMG data for the most part. And we have a couple short-term longitudinal studies on a couple exercises, and they've been really enlightening. Like there was one on seated hamstring curls versus lying leg. Well, yeah, there's the tricep one, but there's the seated hamstring curl versus lying leg curl. And seated hamstring curl caused substantially better hypertrophy on average. So it's like, if you have the option, you go for seated hamstring curls, you know? And then with the tricep one, obviously, yeah, I mean, that one was controversial for some weird reason, but I mean, come on. The results were pretty staggering, and it was a good study.
Yeah.
It was a well-designed study.
The one confusing thing with the study was the way the effect sizes were reported in the abstract, because they reported them as effect sizes when it wasn't that on the app. That was the only confusion. It was a cool study overall. But the coolest study that I'd like to see, and I think the field needs, is a study where we look at whether hypertrophy increases that are regarded as statistically meaningful or significant are visually meaningful. So take a bunch of people, train them, have blind bodybuilding judges, or whatever. We can have a plethora of experts see 2 pictures without knowing which one is before and after, measure their hypertrophy changes, see if they're statistically significant, and be like, okay, people don't care. Yeah, can you see it? Because that's something we don't know at the moment. And
that could shred the entire field. That with Thanos, all of exercise science. Oh, there you go. That's you. No, but that would really lead to, I think, like a replication crisis moment, like in the psychology field, right? Where it's like, oh shoot, the last 50 years were not worth anything. Yeah. or more optimistically, it could say, whew, good thing we got all that research.
Yes.
We notice it. But I mean, also, it's not like, I mean, the point of gaining muscle isn't just to impress a panel of random judges. There's more to it from a mental health and even a physical health. And it is quite obvious that at a certain point, these things would summate to result in visually noticeable hypertrophy. Like if you looked at me when I was 16 versus now, or 20 versus now, you would see a visual difference, even though you might not in a 8-week training study. So even if we were to do that study, it would still have its limitations in the sense that like it may be perhaps statistically significant results would be noticeable. It would just require a longer time frame, right?
Exactly. Yeah, I meant it more for us people, people that care about. But from a medical standpoint, or from strength training is amazing, regardless of whether the visual changes are obvious in 8 weeks or so. I repeated what you said in my own words.
No, man, I love the conversation. It was really cool. And I feel like we talked on a lot of new stuff that I haven't really heard a lot of noise about elsewhere. So I like that.
I appreciate you having me on. It's an honor. And yeah, it was, again, really cool to see you not only put the information out, but also put the training programs out, because, people can now go grab your 2-day or 3-day or 4-day or 5-day per week program and remove all the thinking or the doubt and be like, cool, just going to plug my numbers in there, do what Jeff said, and all good.
Yeah, man, I appreciate that. I've got a couple of videos coming out where I take people through the workout, so I can really emphasize like some of the other factors. Like the first video was more focused on just like the abstract principles, if you will. And then there are obviously some tips in there too, but I'm going to do a couple workouts on the channel where I'll take people through, like, if they don't want to buy the program, they can just follow the stuff in the videos. So yeah,
great.
I appreciate it, man. All right. Well, we'll leave it there for now. I'd love to chat again once you get some more of that, more research done, man. It was really cool getting to speak with you. Appreciate all you do.